Hi, thanks for coming back. So if you've watched the other two videos, I've shown you first of all how you can make and texture an air dry clay tag using FIMO Air Basic. I've showed you how you can colour it up, and now I'm going to show you how you add the stitch details to them. So just two very easy methods. First of all, I'm just going to run running stitch around this love tag. So I've got about 4 strands of embroidery thread in this needle, because I want it to be a nice bold stitch. And I'm not going to put a knot at the end. I'm just going to hold that taut with one finger until I've sewn in and out of the holes in a running stitch. So we go all the way around this shape. And the reason I've not tied a knot at the back is because I always remember when I was at school, my domestic science teacher told me that your work should be as neat on the back as it is on the front. I don't know why they always assumed your work should be as neat on the back as it is on the front, but it's something I've never forgotten. And that's the reason also why I'm using a much longer piece of embroidery thread than I normally would. Because normally, if you're doing embroidery, you don't want to work with about more than 30 centimetres because it just gets tangled. But the shorter the thread you use, the more often you're going to need to tie a knot. This way, now I've finished my running stitch on the front, I can just tie those two ends together and trim them off. So I've only got one knot. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run back in the opposite direction to give the look of a back stitch on here. So you have that solid line of stitching creating the border of the heart. And this is why I say have an even number of holes, because then when you're doing a running stitch or a back stitch, you know that your threads on the last stitch are going to end up at the back of the work. So you can tie them neatly and just clip off the excess. And actually, if you use a matching thread to tie your tag to your gift or around your plant pot, or actually they look quite nice on a card. And just pop through the hole and tie it in a simple overhand knot. You'd obviously use a longer piece to tie it around a present. And then I want to show you how you get this nail art effect. And again, same principle, the fewer knots you have, the better. So this piece of thread is about 3 foot long. It's 3 strands of embroidery thread. I am going to make one small knot in this because I want to make sure it doesn't pop out, because I need to keep this thread under tension as I'm doing it. So I've tied an overhand knot. I'm going to go in from the back, and then I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 holes from there and go down. Now I've not put that knot right up to the back. There's a reason for that, because I'm now going to go up the hole, the 8th hole as it were, and back down the 2nd hole. And then before I pull them tight, I'm just going to put my thread, my needle, through the threads of that knot, so that no matter how tightly I pull it, it won't come through, or it shouldn't come through, because it's quite nice to have a decent sized hole so that you're not struggling to get your needle through it. So it's just lock that in place. Then you come back up the 3rd hole and go down the 9th, come up the 10th, and go down the 4th. And you continue in that way, and it creates a neat stitch on the back. So that whole thing about keeping it neat, again, works very well, especially when I show you the final step in this, which is what I like to do to make sure you can actually use them as a gift tag. So when you get this far, and then you've joined up with that so the 8th hole from where you started, you can come back up here and go back down the 8th. So it crosses it over, as I say, rather like a spirograph. So I've just reached the point where I'm going to go back into this hole here. Now, instinctively you'd just go over the threads, but because of the way that you're working, you want your thread to go over the threads on this part, but it needs to go underneath this thread here. Like so. Then lift it up through this hole, and before you take it back under there, just stitch it underneath those threads and take it down to here. And then that way, the whole time, these clockwise threads are overlapping the anti-clockwise threads. I mean, it's not imperative. If you don't want to do it that way, if you can't be bothered, then you don't have to do it that way. But it makes a much nicer look to the finish of your weave almost. Now, just before I go any further, I'm going to add another length of thread, because that 3 foot of thread that I had hasn't quite completed the whole circle. So, tie yourself a wreath knot, and then if you pull this thread tight, you can then push that thread right down to the bottom, and then grab one of each thread to tighten that wreath knot again. And that way you know that your knot's going to be out of view. And I'll trim the ends off with my paper scissors. Would have made much more sense if I'd used needlework scissors. Thread your needle again, remember where you were. Come up through this hole and then tuck it under these threads before you go back down the other hole. And there you go, you're back. Whoa! A number of times I've thrown these across the table where my thread has got tangled up. It is worth, if you're using much thinner clay, as I say, this is about 3 mil thick, it's worth putting something like a tea towel or something underneath it so you're not banging it against a hard surface. So I've done that. Then just to fasten it off, thread it through the back. And just sew it into an overhand knot a couple of times and trim off the excess. Now, if you're just having these as a decorative item, you can leave them exactly as they are. Oh, one thing I did actually forget to mention is the fact that you need to seal these first with either a spray varnish or a paint-on varnish, or actually you can even use something like Mod Podge. But because I want to use these actually as tags, I want to be able to write something on the back. So I have popped card on the back of these. And the best way to do this is if you grab yourself some PVA, first of all, coat the back of your unsealed clay. If you've not already sealed it with varnish, give it a coat of PVA, because it has a porous surface on it still. Give it a generous coat, and as you're doing that, you can flatten down those loose ends of the thread. What I should have done is I should have cut the circle out of this piece of card first of all. Obviously, if you've got a solid tag like that love or that star one, you don't need to do this step. If you've got something with an aperture, there's no point making an aperture in it if you're then just going to cover it up with a piece of card. So yes, where was I? Yes, we'll paint the back of the card with the aperture cut in it. And then lay your tag lining up the 2 holes in the middle as close as you can. Just flip it over to check that you are lined up. Press it down. And then you can just take a blade. Helps if you do it actually on a proper cutting mat and not on a glass mat. There's less chance of slippage that way. but I like to live dangerously. And then just prick where your threading holes are. And then you can just tie matching embroidery thread through those holes to tie it onto a gift, big chunky necklace, anything you like really. So I hope you enjoyed that series of demonstrations. I hope that's given you some ideas of what you can do with this FIMO Air Basic. And as I say, it comes in a really nice terracotta colour as well. So it's quite nice for making almost like outdoory type things. And especially you'll get more of a depth of colour with the terracotta if you're using oranges and reds to colour. As I say, there'll be a link in the description below for you to download and print out these templates so you can make your own tags. And also, I'll endeavour to put links to the previous videos, so if you come across this one by chance, you know where you're coming from. But if you subscribe in future, you'll get notifications of when we launch a new video. So please do that. Please come and find us on Facebook as well. We're quite interactive. If you ask me a question, I'll always do my best to answer it. Not always correctly, but there you go. Thank you for watching. We hope to see you again very, very soon. In the meantime, keep safe and keep crafting. Cheers. And if you've enjoyed videos by the Crafts channel, hit the like button. Want to see more of us? Then click subscribe. See you next time.